Welcome back tonight with the former Minister of Finance, who's also the MP for Karaga. He is now the newly named ranking member of the Finance Committee, a very powerful committee indeed. Honorable Mohammed Amin Adam, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Bernard.
Clarify for me, some people call you Amin Anta, some call you Amin Adam. Which is which? What is your name?
It's Amin Adam, Mohammed Amin Adam. Anta is a nickname actually, which I got from childhood. So,
Anta, so what does it mean?
Anta is an Arabic word, which means you.
You?
You. So Bernard, you, Anta.
Anta, is it true that you used to teach economics at for Tamale? I met some people who said when they were writing their exams, you were doing free economics tuition for them. Is this correct?
Yeah, I taught economics at secondary school. I've also taught economics at Polytechnic, Tamale Polytechnic at some point when I was doing my national service.
So your primary profession, you consider yourself, because you have many qualifications, what's your primary? Are you an economist or you are a finance person? What are you?
I'm a mixer. Generally, I have worked in the field of economics for a long time. I've studied economics, BA, MPhil, and even my PhD is in energy and petroleum economics. It's a section of economics.
Okay.
So I can say an economist.
So your principal role is that of an economist?
Yes.
I see. As against some ministers of finance who have been accountants.
Yes.
Some have been, for example, Banredu was a chartered accountant, Setekwe was a chartered accountant, Tax, Kenofriata was an investment banker.
Yes.
Osafo was an engineer. Dufour is an economics finance mix. I see. How does economics help in the finance ministry? Because there's so many things going on. What emphasis does it give you versus, say, an accountant?
Well, I think that financial economics is a component of economics generally. And economics has different components or branches, if you like. You have energy economics, financial economics, but all of them will require you to study the basics of economics. And so anybody who finds himself within these branches really can appreciate economic issues. And so the issue about the Minister of Finance, even though we're dealing with money, is controller and accountant general who really deals directly with the money and the cash inflow and the cash outflow. But we at the Ministry of Finance basically, analyze economic issues as they relate to the people, and then we take economic decisions. And so you really need grasp of your economics to be able to do this job. This doesn't mean that only economists can do this job. As you said, even engineers have worked at the ministry as ministers, because you have technical people across the various areas of what we handle, and they will advise you appropriately.
I see. So you are I can say, the leader of the economic side of the opposition. Is that correct to say? Or the finance? Just explain how this works, because I haven't heard you talk until the budget properly. Even though there are many issues in Parliament, you haven't really spoken until the budget.
Yes.
So what is your role within the minority?
Well, in the minority, you have people who have, experience and knowledge in law, and those in economics, and those in finance. Okay. But the privilege I have is having served as, Minister for Finance. The caucus has invested confidence in me that I can lead when it comes to finance and economic issues, and that I believe is the reason they chose me as ranking member on finance, so that checkmate my brother Atu Forsen. Same way he checkmate me.
Okay. So is it tit for tat time?
Yeah.
Is it like tit for tat?
It's not tit for tat. It is important we recognize that opposition is important in this country.
Good.
And this country needs not just opposition, but strong opposition.
Good.
Because government can get off track, particularly issues that relate to economic decisions that affect the people. You just cannot make certain mistakes. And therefore, you need somebody who has been there and who knows how these things are done, who has learned lessons that he will want to share on how to avoid some of the pitfalls, so that at the end of it, all the people we serve are really protected and get the best of interest that we serve. Yeah.
So what is NPP's general, what is NPP saying? And let me frame the question properly, because I think prior to the budget, there was a whole discussion about, is the economy as good as is being said? So for example, when President Mahama made the transition team, he said that they believe that the economy is in a much worse position than we are being made to believe. He made that point in front of President Akufo-Addo. Then his spokespersons also started saying the same thing. So in that build up to the budget, when the Statistical Service released the GDP data a day to the budget, the NPP, for example, Gideon Buako, triumphantly said, this confirms what we've been saying. Is that the basis for all the controversy around the budget? The idea of what kind of economy did NPP leave for NDC? Is that the main issue here?
Well, I think it's important, because if you have to, manage the economy this year, you are building on the economy last year and or previous years. And so history is important in this context. If the fundamentals were not good last year, it will mean that it will have to take time for the economy to recover this year.
Okay.
If the fundamentals were good, then you are building on a good foundation. Okay. And so we expect that the economy will improve faster and significantly. But the new government, right from the beginning, tried to paint a certain picture of the economy they inherited. I think that they wanted to just, give excuses by saying that the economy was bad, it was criminally mismanaged, the economy was in crisis, so that with the goodwill that they have, they can be able to push, certain policies, however bitter those policies are. And people will say, yes, we understand, because they inherited a very bad situation, and so let's bear with them. So that was, in my view, the narrative that they created. The president said that at SONA, he repeated it at the National Economic Dialogue. The Minister for Finance was then to come and use figures to confirm that narrative, as we saw in terms of the fiscal balances that the minister announced. But you see, to assess an economy, you will have to look at various facets of the economy. We have the real economy, then we have the financial economy, and then we have the fiscal economy. Right? If you look at the real economy, everything showed that the economy we handed over to them was a stronger economy.
Stronger now?
Stronger in the sense that before COVID, in fact, even before we took over from them in 2016, the economy grew by 3.4%. In 2015, it was actually 4%. 2016, 3.4%.
Okay.
The NPP took over and were able to accelerate economic growth. The average growth between 2017 and 2019 was about 7%. Average growth. Inflation was single digit. Indeed, single digit from 2018 to 2020. It was a single digit. In fact, the longest single digit that we have ever experienced in our history as a country. Right? Then COVID struck. And then things went haywire to the extent that we had to borrow. Growth actually came down to about 0.5%. In 2021, it went up to about 5%. But then the Russia-Ukraine war also struck, and supply chains were disrupted globally. So every country suffered. So our growth came down again to about 3.1% in 2022. So the projection for 2023, that was when we accepted an IMF program. The projection for 2023 was a growth of 1.5% for 2023. But the economy grew at 3.1% instead, defied all odds. And that was why we said that the recovery had begun from the crisis that every country faced as a result of the global happenings.
Okay.
So from 2023 to 2024, because we grew at 3.1%, the projection for 2024 was also 3%. Later revised mid-year to 4%. But the economy eventually grew by 5.7%. Again, defied all the projections, to grow at 5.7%. So the recovery has been strong, has been faster, and people must acknowledge that.
He's pushed back on that at two. He says the main source of the 2024 growth would be mining in the industry side, a lot of which he claims will be illegal. The second point was that because a lot of your debts you did not pay, it gave you a lot more space. So for example, your debt to GDP reduction, he attributes to the fact that because your debts due in 2024 were not paid, is not a real-time picture of the real situation of debt to GDP. It's just because of the temporary relief of the non-paid debt for 2024, which it believes you have essentially pushed the can down the road, because in 2027 is paying, 2028 is paying. So he's saying that it's not a realistic view to use 1 year's growth to say that we are recovering if you don't go into those details that he mentions.
Well, but this is the point. First of all, I'll respond to the mining issue.
Yeah.
Of course, mining is a major part of our economy. And therefore, the growth of mining really should be seen as playing its role in accelerating the economy. But the reason they usually refer to mining is because they think the mining sector doesn't create so many jobs. And therefore, if your growth is anchored on mining, then you are achieving a jobless growth. Yeah. That is the point I think they try to make. But is it the truth? No. If you look at the data released by the Ghana Statistical Service, mining and quarrying grew at 9.4%. Somebody will say gold grew at 19%, but gold is a subcomponent of mining and quarrying. So you can say within mining and quarrying, the contribution of gold in the growth is 19%. But gold cannot stand at the same level as information and communication. Because while information and communication is a whole, gold is a subcomponent of mining and quarrying. So if you look at mining and quarrying together, it grew by 9.4%. And that's where you feel the effect of mining.
But a lot of that is fueled by the increase in the price of gold.
Yes,
which then leads to high revenue. So similar to the 2011 oil, you can have growth because revenues have increased. But for enclave economies, if employment doesn't increase and the pass-through into the value chain does not increase, it may be growth nonetheless, but it's not transformative growth.
No, but if revenue increases and you don't invest that revenue, you won't get the growth. So that should be borne in mind. The revenue that you get must be invested and invested in the productive sectors to generate the growth. But even before then, let me complete the point I was making on the contribution of mining. So mining and quarrying grew by 9.4%. Construction grew by 9.6%. So why didn't the minister say that the growth was influenced by construction? Digitalization, information and communication grew by 15.8%. Why didn't the minister say that the growth was influenced by information and communication, or digitalization for that matter? So this is a misrepresentation of facts in my view. Right. Then the second issue you raised is about the debt we are not paying.
Yes.
Look, let us call a spade a spade. If the economy is growing, it's growing. Look at the pre-COVID era, when we're not paying our debt, when we grew at 7% average. We're paying our debts. And so growth is growth. If you don't pay your debt and the money you would have used to pay the debt, you don't invest it well, you will not achieve that growth. So 5.7%. And the areas that are bringing the growth, mining and quarrying, construction, information, how are they related to debt payment?
Well, he was talking about the second was debt to GDP.
Yes, the debt to GDP
because so the point is, this second question was on debt to GDP, that if you are not paying your debts and you've kicked the debt to next 2-3 years, the way you quantify the debt for this year, debt to GDP for this year, may be low but artificial.
No, I don't think so, because if you were actually paying your debts, that would rather reduce your debt to GDP, because the debt stock will reduce. So I don't see the point he's trying to make. The reality is that when they left government in 2016, the debt to GDP was 73%. 73% until the GDP was rebased in 2018, and then the figure changed to 56%. Now, we had to borrow because we're faced with crisis in 2020. And so the debt levels increased to about 80%, 80.2% of GDP. But it takes a debt strategy to even declare debt standstill. It takes a debt strategy and skilled negotiation to even negotiate your debts down. It takes a good debt strategy. And so we employed that good debt strategy. And then we declared a debt, we took advantage of, opportunities for declaring debt standstill through the G7 framework, the G27 framework. That's what we did. And then we went ahead to negotiate these debts, to the extent that we got a debt cancellation, outright debt cancellation of about $4 billion US. And then we got debt service relief of about $7.5 billion US. If it is not a debt strategy which is backed by skilled, negotiation, you cannot achieve that. And so I don't know why the minister will run away from that.
Let me ask my own question.
Yes.
Forget about Atul now.
But Ben, I think I need to conclude on this. So you have a debt stock, you know, in percentage of GDP, which measures your debt sustainability. That went up to 80.2%. By the time we exited in 2024, it came down to 61.8% of GDP. 61.8% of GDP, which is lower than the pre-COVID levels of 65.7% in 2019. They should tell you that we are even doing better in terms of debt sustainability than COVID.
Okay.
Than the period before COVID.
Based on debt to GDP.
And that is what the IMF measures, debt sustainability.
But let me ask you.
Because if your debt cannot generate GDP growth, then what kind of debt is it? This is why, Bernard, we are saying that in spite of the fact that we borrowed, there's no doubt about that, every government borrows, but we added 20 billion United States dollars to the size of GDP.
Okay.
It means that you borrowed and invested in the productive sector. This is why as GDP grows, your debt to GDP shrinks. You understand? Assuming you don't borrow more. And we haven't borrowed more. 2023, we didn't borrow externally. 2024, we didn't do external borrowing as well. Just as we're not paying, we were also not borrowing. So, and this is why, in between September and October 2024, actually, our debt level reduced by 68 billion Ghana cedis.
Compared to previous years?
Yes, 68 billion Ghana cedis we saw in debt reduction. So you didn't borrow, you rather saw a decline in debt.
You know, the main point with this is when we compare political parties, it's easy to have a debate because Atu has said this, you've said this.
Yes.
But for somebody like me sitting from the outside, in your 8 years, the amount of commercial credit you took was too much, right? So your multilateral debt and bilateral debts were not that quickly growing as your Eurobond forays. You went to Eurobond many times. So that chunk was very big. That, a lot of people believe, set us on an unsustainable path for debt. When you chose to do the domestic debt exchange, then people's savings and people's investments were given haircuts. Now, a lot of people say you cannot be praising yourself for partially bringing us out of a hole you created by your own reckless borrowing. This is the view. Forget about two forcing. You brought us here in the first place. So the least you can do is to take us out in a sustainable way. So don't compare yourself to 2016. Compare yourself to what you were doing until those forays into the market led us to the unsustainable debt path.
Well, I don't know how anybody would describe borrowing to address, you know, the problems associated with COVID was reckless borrowing. I don't know if anybody is right to call that reckless borrowing, you know, or you borrow to address issues relating to the financial sector cleaning. When we knew that a lot of the banks were going down the drain. I don't know if it is right to describe that as reckless borrowing, but I'm saying that it takes a government that understands debt dynamics to be able to borrow and be able to negotiate a reduction in its debt. And so if we borrow to unsustainable levels, the question should be, by the time we left, were the debt sustainable or not? And I can tell you
they are saying no, because you owe so much and they have so many things to pay.
No, but the debts have been published by them. The debt figure has been published by them. They themselves have published that the debt to GDP is 61.8%. It is not my figure. It's not my data.
Yeah, it's in the budget. I mean, beyond the debt to GDP, for example, when Atibosin came here, let me quote him, we have domestic bonds that we have inherited in the next 4 years put together. We have to repay 150.3 billion, of which in 2027 alone, we have to repay a debt of 57.6 billion. 2028, we have to repay 52.5 billion. Then he goes on to talk about commitments you have made, some of which you did not even make allocations for. For example, he says they owe contractors and suppliers 67.5 billion. Basically saying that the way you have structured the repayments, a lot of whatever they get will be used to pay debt you contracted.
But Bernard, you are
so that's the point he's making.
He's assuming that we went into this election to lose. If we won the election, will we say what he's saying? And so government assets are government assets. Government liabilities are government liabilities. It just happens that they won the power and they have to pay. Just as we paid debts when we took over from them in 2016, we paid debts. You remember we had to pay the Euro bonds that they took. And not just that, energy sector debt of $2.5 billion. And so I don't see why it will be running away from the issues that they ask Ghanaians to vote them for to come and address.
So we've dealt with the first point. You're saying the economy was not as bad.
So that is the real sector I have just talked about, the real economy.
Let's take a breather.
Which shows that the economy was strong. I was to come to the financial sector and then the fiscal.
We can deal with that. And of course, this is the point of view. My guest is Dr. Mohamed Amin Adam, who is the former Minister of Finance, is MP for Karaga. He's also, you can call him the minority lead on economy and finance. When we come back, we'll now look at what problem he has with the budget. He says he has a lot. He even brought slides to show that there are many issues with the budget. He says the budget is dead on arrival. We'll deal with that when we come back. Stay with us.